It's a bit overcast, but it's another beautiful day here in Lake Tahoe on July 13th, 2024. Today's guest is Kris Rasmussen, a Silicon Valley veteran and the current CTO of Figma, the leading app for collaborative design and the company that took the design world by storm with their web-based application software. Kris has worked in tech his whole life, starting by majoring in computer science at UCLA, before founding several companies of his own. He also worked a short stint at Microsoft, Airbnb, and served as engineering lead at Asana, before finding Figma, where he has worked since their product launch in 2016. Kris, welcome to Tahoe Minds.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
So, you worked at several other Silicon Valley startups and have also started a few companies of your own. What about startups or Silicon Valley drew you in?
Yeah, I actually was raised in the Silicon Valley, so it was hard not to kind of be immersed in it. It was a little bit different when I lived there. I don't think it was quite as glamorous as it was back then. I think there weren't many people who studied computer science when they were young or thought it was like the most exciting career path as the way people think about it now. But I think just by virtue of being surrounded by friends and family who are trying to do stuff in the space, I got intrigued by it, and I learned that there was ways for me to make a little bit more money than my dad would pay me laying cobblestones in our yard.
Can you talk about some of those companies that you started and joined? I think you started one in college.
Yeah. I started a business like doing consulting and contracting when I was really in high school, actually, working for like friends and family who had their own businesses and startups in the tech space. And then I used that to kind of just learn a little bit more about entrepreneurship and started a number of small businesses going into college. One of the businesses I had was like one of the first kind of WYSIWYG website creators. I think I was like actually competing with Squarespace back then, although Squarespace I think has done far better than my little business. In my case, I was building a website creator for personal trainers in the fitness industry, and I worked with one of my clients who was a fitness manufacturer so that personal trainers could build a personal web presence and then also sell products directly to their clients. And then, I started a couple other businesses along the way. I had a business with a co-founder that was called RivalSoft, and we built like some of the first kind of competitive intelligence software so that people could track mentions of their company and other companies online, and then also aggregate that information and disseminate it to their sales team and stuff like that. And then, a number of other smaller businesses, nothing worth talking about.
Yeah. Gotcha. And how or why did you decide to niche down into the fitness industry?
Yeah, well, just because I had a client who was building kind of fitness products, and I saw an opportunity to kind of both create a presence online for actual personal trainers, and then also to help them kind of resell my clients' products and make some additional revenue streams from it. Gotcha. At the time I was actually I started the business before I graduated college, and then I got permission to run it at Microsoft. And part of the reason I stayed so specialized was because I was working on some similar products at Microsoft, and so I needed to be specialized in order to keep my job at Microsoft.
I see. And then what about RivalSoft?
That was, so actually I had a friend, and we started like kind of, we had this idea to do a social network around an activity feed. This was before Facebook launched their whole activity feed. And we raised money to do it. We started building it. And then like shortly thereafter, Facebook launched their activity feed. And we're like, okay, this does not make sense anymore. So we're like, okay, we've been working on this forever. What can we do really quick just to get some attention and like feel like we did something? And so we actually thought we'd like build this kind of joke. At the time, there was this popular website called Delicious. And we knew that like, in the early days of TechCrunch, a lot of entrepreneurs were like trying to find ideas and paying attention to everyone else's ideas. And so we just in 2 weeks built this thing called Competitious as like a play on words. And it was mostly meant as a joke, but it got like this really positive TechCrunch article and then a bunch of investor interest. And so we just decided to like turn it into a real business. And that's how we started RivalMap, and RivalSoft was the company.
Gotcha. So what did the general timeline look like from starting it to growing it, and then eventually I think it was acquired?
It was acquired eventually, yeah. So we started it, we did the first launch in 2 weeks, like from idea to build. And then it was pretty basic in the first 2 weeks, but got some attention. And then once we raised a small seed round, we relaunched the product in a more professional, complete way in about 6 months. I don't. This is nothing impressive, but we got to a point where we were kind of like cash flow positive with just ourselves in that amount of time, and actually ultimately decided to turn it into a lifestyle business just because it wasn't actually the thing we really wanted to do. It just kind of happened out of circumstance, and so we ran it on the side, and I actually went to go lead engineering at one of my primary investors' companies instead.
Yeah, got you. And how long from the start to the acquisition?
It was probably on the order of like 2 years or so. Yeah.
Got you. No, that's pretty impressive. That is pretty impressive. And then what about, you briefly mentioned working for as the engineering lead for your lead investors company. What about the other companies, Asana, Airbnb, Microsoft?
Yeah, so I joined Aptana, which was like a developer tools company at the time. So they built like developer IDEs for people writing code, and then also some of the early kind of like easy cloud hosting environments. I ended up running the engineering team there towards the end of it. That one I did just because I was interested in the space, and I like was very grateful to our lead investor who was like allowing us to run this business on the side and not really expecting anything in return. He was an awesome guy. It was super fun. Around that time, I was also working with Nathan Bacharczyk, who's like one of the co-founders of Airbnb. We were trying a bunch of side projects and things like that, and one of his projects was actually Airbnb. And so eventually Airbnb got traction, and they made me an offer to join as the first engineer, and regrettably I turned that down. Definitely in retrospect, I think I should have revisited that decision. But yeah, eventually, many years later, after I worked at Asana, I joined Airbnb.
Gotcha. And I mean, in hindsight, obviously, it's regrettable. But what made you turn down the Airbnb offer?
Yeah, I mean, I think in all honesty, I just didn't really see how big it could become. I thought there was definitely something there, but it wasn't necessarily in the sweet spot of things that I'm personally excited about. And then I think on top of that, at the time, they were a small, scrappy startup. The offer wasn't very compelling on the surface. I think in retrospect, the equity portion was very compelling, but I was just still figuring things out, and it just didn't make sense to me at the time.
Yeah. So you've been in startups in Silicon Valley pretty much for your entire career. How did you use that experience to transition to a role at Figma? Did they find you, or did you find them?
Yeah, so I think just to be clear, all the businesses I started, nothing was anything impressive. It was just a bunch of smaller businesses. But I think through the course of trying to become an entrepreneur, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. My family's all entrepreneurs. I kind of learned that one, it's really hard, right? A lot of it has to do with picking the right problem. And two, by virtue of having gotten to go work for my lead investors company, I realized that as long as I treat a business like my own, it still feels like my own, and I can still do all the things I want to do. And so I just felt less limited by the fact that it wasn't my own business at that point, and I started to kind of rethink whether or not I really needed to do something from scratch, or if I just needed to find a really talented group of people. And actually, that's what led me to Asana. So I was working at the Aptana company, and I just really wanted to kind of see if I could find a really strong group of people, like-minded people to work with. And I got introduced to Dustin and Justin, who were starting Asana in the early days, and realized we had some shared interests in technology and stuff like that. And fortunately, I did well enough on their interview to join as one of the first engineers, and eventually became the engineering lead and ran the engineering team in the first years.
And do you think that a founder's character traits or characteristics, personality, plays a pretty big role in terms of getting people to both join the startup and invest money?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think if you've tried enough startups, right, most of them don't succeed, and many of the ones that I started and other people started that I worked with didn't succeed. I think you start to kind of realize what it really takes to make it work. And obviously a lot of it is picking the right problem. I'd actually say much of it is picking the right problem, but it's also picking the right people who are passionate about the general space. The space itself has to be interesting enough. The initial idea doesn't have to be perfect. And then you got to find people who are resilient, dedicated, really, really sweat the details, and care about everything that you have to care about to make a business successful. And so I think it takes some people multiple tries to get to that point of actually being that kind of founder. And then other people figure it out, pretty quickly. But, you start to kind of realize that these are the people that you're going to kind of be working with on something that doesn't yet exist. And you have to really believe in them, and they have to really believe in you, and you have to really believe in the space. And if those things don't line up perfectly, you shouldn't force it.
And what about Figma? How did you know their team was one that you could bet on, one that you could really believe in? Were they, what character traits were they signaling to you that, gave you the go-ahead?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to get to work with Figma part-time before joining full-time. So I got a lot of exposure to the team before I made the commitment to join full-time. And actually during that time, I was taking a kind of extended sabbatical. I was working with a lot of different companies, so I got to kind of get a lot of different data points of how different companies operated and what spaces were interesting. But what really stood apart for Figma was just like immediately I could see that the team was incredibly high aptitude. At the time, they were all relatively early in their career. I think it was like the first time in my career I felt like the old person. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I was necessarily teaching them anything. It was like they were teaching us all, the things that we needed to figure out. And then the other thing that stood out is, while they were very, very competent, they also were very, very humble. And it was very clear that a lot of the people, not just the founders, but also some of the early employees, had already had experiences where they'd seen how crazy things can get when they scale quickly. And they were being very intentional, not just about like how they wanted to succeed or like what they wanted to build to succeed, but actually how they wanted to do it and what kind of culture and company they wanted to build. And so in some sense, it was like a combination of like really high aptitude just from like a kind of technical and product perspective, but also high aptitude from an emotional intelligence perspective that stood out. And it felt like instead of like, traditional startup things, including some of the stuff that I was involved in, where, normally people are kind of early in their career, they're trying to prove something, they're trying to prove to each other that they're good. Figma felt more like everyone was just trying to lift each other up. And I thought that was a really, really awesome kind of refreshing culture to be a part of. So that's the immediate thing that's kind of set them apart in my eyes.
Gotcha. And what do you think set yourself apart? Why do you think they were so willing to, hire you? First you were VP, but now CTO. What made you stand out, do you think?
Yeah, I think I've made many mistakes in my career. And I think one of the kind of humbling aspects of having this sabbatical and working with companies just as a contractor is that you can't, like, you're working with companies that don't really know you. Like a lot of times people rise in a given company and they get all this sort of like implicit respect and authority by virtue of the stuff that they did before. But when you transfer companies, that doesn't always carry with you in the way you would expect, even if you're like a really well-known person. And I think by virtue of having been exposed to a number of different companies doing this sort of like technical advising contracting work, it was a very humbling experience for me. And I started to learn how to influence things that people weren't necessarily asking me to do in a way that, made them want to ask for my help rather than me asserting that, I knew what to do or something like that. And so if anything, I think it was just the fact that I had learned more humility at that point in my career that maybe set me apart, and the fact that I had some domain expertise that was relevant to the company.
And for those of us who might not know exactly what Figma is, what is it? What is the product? What value prop do you guys bring? What differentiators do you guys have?
Yeah, so I think the simplest way to think about it in terms of the initial products we launched is that we brought like kind of collaborative. We brought basically collaboration to design. So our product is designed to help companies who are building products visualize their products before they actually build them. So we're a product design tool, and we're used by product designers as kind of the core constituent, but actually 70% of our users are all the other functions that product designers work with to bring their designs to market and to life. And so collaboration is like a key part of that. But yeah, you can kind of think of us as like Google Docs for design in some sense.
Okay, so that 70%, what other types of people do you guys bring into the design process to, collaborate?
Yeah, so actually we have just as many engineers using our products every day as we do designers, so that's a big part of it. We also have like product managers, product marketing managers, QA, basically every function on a product team you can imagine, including executives and sales professionals and stuff like that.
So do you think that's the biggest differentiator, the ability to collaborate within a team, within a company?
I think that was, the initial differentiator was being web-based, which just implicitly makes you a lot more collaborative because you don't have to install software. The software can spread just like links, and everyone understands how links work. It just makes it so much easier to kind of get on the same page with your team. But over time, we added a lot of other differentiators as well. For example, we brought a lot of kind of like engineering principles to design to help these companies that were scaling out their design teams get these economies of scale by building shared design systems and then using those design systems to drive consistency across their user experience and make their products better for the end user. So there's a lot of additional differentiators we've added along the way.
Got you. So what strategies, in terms of strategies to scale and grow Figma, do you think that was probably the biggest one, bringing those differentiators? Or what were you guys most focused on?
Yeah, so I think like the reason we grew is like, one, we were web-based. So it's just like, when you're competing with like desktop software, which was the case at the time, as I mentioned before, it's just that much easier to get an entire team or an entire company to adopt it. It also is a huge differentiator because you're no longer siloed in the design team. The design team is ultimately working in service of bringing these ideas to life. And so we recognized from day one that like we needed to build a different kind of design tool that was built for the entire product team. So I think that's like what gave us an opportunity to really stand out in the market. But like what really enabled us to succeed was just listening to our users and really paying attention to their needs and actually being one of those users ourselves and trying to build better software for ourselves. And so, we were constantly trying to balance like our own perspective on, what was needed in order to help the industry evolve with the reality of where people are today and paying a lot of attention to that and looking at where we were as a company, ourselves. And so we did things like we brought a lot of functionality that was spread across multiple tools into a single tool, because at the end of the day, like the pace at which you can align your company around an idea and a direction for a product is really important. And if you have to manage different tools and import and export things between those tools, it can add a lot of friction to the process. And then we also started paying attention to the needs of developers pretty early and introduced like code inspection tools and now dev mode and other things, which I think also set us apart.
Gotcha. And what's the main way or main funnel that you guys receive customer feedback through? And there's a lot of, of course there's a lot of customer feedback from a lot of different people. How did you decide which feedback to listen to and which to discard? How do you balance what to implement? Because a lot of different people want a lot of different things. So what was the deciding factor for what to implement in the end? How did you guys come to that conclusion?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting because I think there's like this common wisdom when you're doing startups that you shouldn't over-index on one customer, or like you shouldn't over-index on a big company. And I think that comes from a place where in traditional enterprise startups, like if you over-index, like you get some sort of like special contract with a customer and they ask you to do all this special work, you kind of like over-index on their priorities versus your own priorities. But I think there's actually a way to kind of blend the two, because like the reality is oftentimes like your long list of, your huge backlog of things you want to do over the life cycle of your company actually has a lot of overlap with any given customer you talk to. And so, yeah, it's true that you don't want to over-index on a single customer, but you do want to like listen to the wider audience you have and make sure that you're trying to intersect kind of your idea of the sequence you do things with like the reality of the market and the people you already serve. And so I think one of the things that was really helpful was both like, being really involved with early adopters and individual users on Twitter and in our support forums. Like engineering did all the support in the early days, and we still are very active on these things. The other thing that was helpful is like we actually got some big customers to adopt us very early. Airbnb was like one of those customers. Uber and Microsoft were others. And I think a mistake a lot of startups do is they're like told not to over-index on the needs of these big customers too early. But I actually think if you're building a professional tool, you don't want to have a leaky funnel. You never want to lose one of those customers because you couldn't keep up with their needs. And so I think we did a good kind of balancing act of really recognizing that these are influential, important customers and, keeping up with their needs while still listening to all the smaller companies that also needed our software, and kind of balancing the two perspectives. In the early days, all our revenue came from our only paid offering, which was our Pro tier at the time. Okay. But we had some very big customers using our Pro tier before we offered, organization and enterprise tiers. But I'd say that it was probably more 80-20 or even 90-10.
Bigger enterprises to smaller customers?
No, smaller customers to bigger enterprises. And I think still today, if you just look at we have just an immense number of customers across big and large companies. So I wouldn't be surprised if the ratio still skews in terms of absolute numbers towards freelancers, small companies, things like that. But the big customers are also have a lot more users proportionately to the small customers. And so if you look at the total distribution of users in our system, it might be a little more balanced at this point in time.
Gotcha. And was that part of the overall strategy, the growth strategy, or was it kind of built into the products that these smaller customers would benefit more from Figma?
Yeah, I think we were definitely kind of in the generation of companies that was trying to shift from traditional top-down enterprise building to more kind of bottoms-up product-led growth and adoption. So that was definitely part of the strategy. We always wanted to make sure, and still do today, that we had a really compelling free offering so that people could get started, they can use the product, and if they do scale to the needs of an actual business or need some of the more premium functionality, they have ability to do so. But it's really important for us to actually have a really strong free offering and continue to have this sort of product-led growth. And even the free users who never convert to paid users are important to us because we learn a lot from them, and they also contribute to our community, which is a big part of our success.
Gotcha. So you started off as a contractor. How did you make the transition from that more engineering role into where you now are, a C-suite executive, CTO, a more managerial role?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer to that, other than I've never worried about whether or not I'm a manager or an IC or whatever. I think at my core, I just like making things, and I've always tried to optimize for doing whatever is going to be best to help a given product or company succeed. And perhaps as a contractor, by virtue of some of the experiences I had leading teams before, I was still thinking that way, even though I was only being asked to initially just fix code and stuff like that. I think it's just if I have any advice for anyone just trying to help make things successful, is just focus on what's necessary to make the thing successful. Worry less about what your role is or what your title is. And I think generally, if you make the right decisions, good things will come.
And how did your responsibilities change? Was it pretty easy, like a linear path from engineer to VP to CTO, or did you have to make some personal adjustments?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there was a bit of a change from going from just contracting with the company to leading engineering for the company. At the time, the company was very small, so it wasn't anything that I hadn't done before in my career at that point in time. But I think over the course of the growth of the company, a lot has changed. I don't think much has changed by virtue of my title changing or anything like that. I think I've always pretty much had the same role. But as companies grow and get more complex and scale, you have to adapt with the company. And so I think there's various inflection points where just the team got larger. I had to kind of shift my focus, and then also I hired great people who enabled me to focus on other things because they could do what I was doing as well or better than I was before.
Yeah, and when you are hiring, what are you looking for? Are you looking for traits that you see in the the original core team of Figma, or are you looking for evolution? Traits that kind of add on to that core team?
Definitely there's a core set of values that we're hiring for and have always hired for. But I think, as the company has gotten larger and, our customer needs have evolved and stuff like that, we've also looked for new skill sets and new experiences. So there's change, but there's also a constant in terms of just generally what we value.
Awesome. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. I do want to hear your opinions, as you've been in the tech space forever, your opinions surrounding AI, and specifically for Figma and designers. What advantages do you think humans have over AI in terms of design, or just in general?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to acknowledge that I think there's a lot of different perspectives on AI right now, and rightfully so. I think if you actually kind of like think more deeply about what's happening, I don't know, like a lot of people at some point in their life, they sort of experience this like somewhat like life-changing or maybe even traumatic event where something they assumed about the world is just fundamentally challenged. It might be like, losing a loved one. It might be losing a job. Who knows what it is, but like something just causes you to kind of completely reevaluate your mental model for the world. Because most of our life, we're trying to kind of build this mental model and predict what's going to happen in the world. And then something happens that just like totally changes that. And it can cause us to get depressed. It can cause us to totally reset what we're doing. And I think like, in some sense, what's happened with AI is like this thing that we all were pretty skeptical could happen is starting to happen. And I think as a result, everyone is kind of like not sure what to think and having a really hard time predicting the future. And I think that creates a lot of tension and anxiety. And I think it's just worth acknowledging that and accepting that and understanding that that is natural. And we do have to kind of reevaluate how the world will change from here. With all of that said, I think oftentimes when people go through these events in their lives, at first it can be really scary, but as we start to reevaluate our own mental models and start to learn and make more sense of the future, really incredible new things can happen. And so I think, with AI, there's definitely, like, all of us are still sort of grappling with, like, what does this mean? But I think what we're starting to see is, one, the models can't do everything. Like, there's definitely limitations. Like, I do not think there's any model out there that does a better job at actually building and designing systems and writing code or designing products than the best humans can do right now. And then I also think that we're so focused on like how they might replace us that we're not seeing how they can actually become tools for us. So I think like right now my focus, like I'm a maker at heart. I still like write code on the side. I still like do CAD design and software design just for fun. I think that, at the end of the day, whatever we build in terms of technology is in service of humans. And I, as a human, need to understand deeply what I'm working with. And so even if there are times when I want to use like some of this new technology in order to kind of expedite some of the kind of more tedious rote work I'm doing, which, may not always be tedious or rote to other people, I still think there's always going to be a time and place to actually go into the details and really kind of work through the nuances of whatever it is we're doing, be it designing a product, writing code, whatever, in order to ensure that we have the right mental model for how a system behaves or how a design looks or what it conveys. Because at the end of the day, I think that we have to believe in the output of our work. And other people have to be convinced in that. And if you just have like a model generating something, like for example, if I told a model to give you a list of the best restaurants in the world, you don't really know why it's telling you that. Whereas if like your best friend told you what the best restaurants in the world are, it's much more compelling to you, right? There's someone who you can associate that with, who you understand. And so I think at the end of the day, we still have to understand things and have a connection to them. And so I think this idea that like prompts are going to replace everything is kind of foolish, because at the end of the day, one, prompts aren't it's not like that efficient to change a color by trying to describe the color. It's much easier to grab a color wheel. But also it just sort of removes the details, which are sometimes essential for us to really build a connection with whatever it is we're working with and be able to explain it to others.
Yeah, and at Figma, as a company or personally, how do you guys navigate uncertainties like this? I mean, as you said, AI is nobody knows what's going to happen. So how do you go about navigating those uncertain scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, we have to, like, just like we've always done, we have to start with like what we think people actually want and need. And there's a lot of different perspectives out there. But at the end of the day, it's like very obvious that there's some aspects of design that are like tedious. And there's people that clearly want us to expedite those, right? That's like kind of what we've been doing all along. We've been trying to figure out ways to build a more efficient, productive design platform. So for example, like, one of the things that's pretty tedious is if you're assembling a design for a big company, like Microsoft or something like that, you're not actually designing every single component from scratch, right? Like you don't want to introduce like 1,000 different variations of the same underlying button. That's kind of the antithesis of good user experience. So you have to go find these components that already exist. And searching for those things can be very, very tedious, right? And so one of the features we just launched is making it far easier to find the stuff that you need. And I think there's opportunities to help you assemble it more quickly as well, so that you're spending less time trying to find and assemble things and more time trying to actually look at these representations and align with your team around which configuration of the design is likely to be the most successful, and then elevate that design with all of the tools and skills that you already have.
Yeah, so I mean, you can't go into any details about what's not released yet, but what are you excited about for the future of the company? Any hints as to new products or new tools?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we've been very focused all along on helping people go from idea to final product, or imagination to reality, if you will. And I'm very excited right now because there are some aspects of that process that are very hard to help people with historically using traditional technology. And I think we're at this position where we really get to kind of go deeper into some of these other aspects of that process. Like we have this new developer product that we're working on, but also some of this new technology and AI, if you will, is making some of the more tedious, challenging aspects of that process actually feasible and possible now. And that's a really exciting thing to see.
Yeah. So you live here in Tahoe now, working full-time at Figma. You have a wife, you have 2 kids, you travel a lot, but you also like to wake surf and go on the boat and mountain bike. How do you balance your life working so hard as a C-suite executive at a pretty incredible, valuable startup? Do you have any principles you live by?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a point in my life where I was trying to do a lot of different things, and I realized that I wasn't doing anything well. So one of the kind of principles I live by is I just got to resist the temptation to take advantage of every opportunity, or try to do every outdoor activity or something like that, and just pick a few things that I can really commit myself to and go deep on. And so right now I have to be very thoughtful about what I do beyond work and family. So I think now that I live in Tahoe, I think mountain biking is my new activity to stay in shape. When I lived in San Francisco, surfing was the activity. But I try not to do too many other activities because there's only so much time. And I actually really enjoy the kind of craft of getting better at something rather than just trying a bunch of things. But yeah, when it comes to family, I just have to really draw firm boundaries around kind of when I gotta sign off and resist the temptation to react to every single thing, every single moment. I got to get a lot better at that, and I think you have to get a lot more efficient with how you use your time. A lot of people assume that once you have kids, you can't be as successful with whatever else you're doing, but it actually forces you to just look at the ways you were spending your time before and become a lot more efficient and focus more on the results rather than the effort.
So this sounds odd in the context of career, but do you think having a family, kids, wife has been beneficial for your career?
I think so, yeah. I mean, it definitely hasn't hurt my career in any way. But I think actually the most, going back to family, one of the things that was probably the best lesson I ever learned was the value of commitment. And I learned it from my wife. My wife and I were dating, I think, for 8 or 9 years before we ultimately got engaged. And in those years, every single time there was a minor disagreement or an argument, it was always sort of is this it? Is this the thing we should reevaluate our relationship over? But as soon as we got engaged, all those minor disagreements and arguments just became little road bumps, and we just didn't second guess things anymore because we were committed to each other. And that was actually a really valuable lesson for me. That's actually what happened prior to joining Figma. I think up until that point in my career, I had jumped around perhaps a little too much. And it just became very obvious to me that like it's just so valuable to just commit to something, because that's when you really go deep and you really build the relationships and the expertise and the knowledge that helps carry you forward. And so I think that's been a big lesson, and I'm still just as committed to my wife and my family as I am Figma.
Yeah, I think there's this idea in the tech industry especially that jumping around jobs is, the best way to improve your career, especially in terms of salary. Now that you're kind of locked in working for Figma, do you disagree with that sentiment? What are your thoughts surrounding that?
I definitely don't think that's the right thing. And to be clear, I didn't jump around for salary. I probably jumped around out of FOMO or something like that. I think that people are over-indexed on these like short-term changes in compensation and stuff like that versus thinking about the bigger picture and the long term. I don't think I've ever asked for a change in my salary, or if I have, it's been exceedingly rare. I focus more on just trying to do what I think is best for the company and the business, and maybe sometimes the kind of way you get reciprocated for that takes a little bit longer. But I believe in the end of the day, if you really focus on driving value, it has to be rewarded. And I think that the longer you're with a company, actually, the more value you become to that company. I think a lot of people assume that it's all about just like proving that you're valuable to some other company, but people underestimate the value of the domain expertise and the knowledge you develop about a specific company and how hard it is for a company to replace that. And so, it might not be as quick as like taking an offer that gives you a higher salary outside of your own kind of promotion or review cycle at the company you're at. But at the end of the day, I think if you stick with the company, you're going to do much better in the long term.
Yeah, I think generally also a lot of people are FOMO-ish. There's a lot of people that want to do more than they can do, achieve all these things in such a short period of time. So do you have any advice for someone who might be in that mindset that needs to niche down or find what they're good at?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the case that you have to work at a company for 10 years, right? I'm not saying that at all. There are good reasons to change companies. But I think that my advice is basically try to make decisions that you're willing to commit to for a reasonable amount of time. You have to decide for yourself what amount of time you need in order to really grow. And by the way, I think a lot of people are over-indexed on learning versus growing. It's fun to learn, but sometimes it's not fun to grow. And at the same time, I think growing is really important. And so I think you really got to think about things in terms of like, what are you hoping to learn and how are you hoping to grow, and how long do you need to stick with something to actually give it a shot? And don't worry so much about like whether or not someone else in your peer group is, getting promoted faster than you or something like that. I think if you really focus on having an impact and doing the right thing, and you try to pick companies and teams you believe in, good things will come.
Yeah. So what does a normal day look like for you doing all this stuff? I mean, it's probably abnormal, but yeah, normal day.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I think the answer is there is no typical work day for me in my mind. It's always changing. And I think just being comfortable with that is a good thing to get used to. But yeah, I mean, it ranges from a day full of meetings to actually diving deep into a technical problem that isn't going as well as we hoped, to like, working really close with the customer to better understand their needs and what we can do better for them. So it's constantly changing, and I think that's how it should be.
And is there any way to organize that chaotic schedule? Do you try to get your meetings in the beginning of the week, or is it kind of random and you can't really control it?
I used to try to control it, and I think just as the company and the business has got more complex, I've just kind of accepted that some of these things are outside of my control. But I do take time to kind of reflect on how I'm spending my time every couple weeks or months, and I look, and think about how can I be more strategic, and am I really spending my time on the right things? And then I try to use that to influence how I plan my days going forward.
Awesome. So we'll wrap up by asking the final question, the question I ask everybody on this podcast. What advice, if you could go back and give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what we were talking about before. I think I had trouble sticking with things for long enough to really give them a shot. And if I had time to go back and kind of reevaluate some of my decisions, I think I would have told myself to stick with some of the things I did earlier on in my career a bit longer.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kris, so much for joining me today. I do appreciate it. And if you guys are watching on YouTube, please make sure to like and subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, make sure to follow and leave a rating. And share this podcast with 1 or 2 friends who you think might be especially interested in Kris's interesting career in Silicon Valley. And I will see you guys in the next episode.
Thanks, Nick.